Today's exploration takes us back to the U.S. Civil War, Clues to a Reset, exploring the film and book, 1861 to 1865. The documentary film The Civil War, released in 1990 by Ken Burns. Ken Burns is an American documentary filmmaker, and it had been a passion project of his to bring the Civil War to the big screen. He achieved this by pitching the idea to public broadcasting services and having the film released in 1990. The intention of today's exploration is to explore both the film and then the subsequent illustrated book that Ken Burns did to look at different perceptions of the Civil War. It's safe to say that the enduring perceptions that the United States has of the Civil War go back to this film. And it's interesting to explore and ask some questions about it because you can look in the previous decades and see how the perceptions seem to go back and forth, and even after this film, how the perceptions of the way Americans regard the Civil War continuously change. And yet it seems like it's an event that we are constantly tied to, and we're never going to let go, no matter how many years pass. Well, let's look about the Civil War, the miniseries. The Civil War is a 1990 American television documentary miniseries created by Ken Burns about the American Civil War. It was first broadcast to air on public broadcasting service for 5 consecutive nights from September 23rd to 27, 1990. And I did view it when it came out. More than 39 viewers tuned in to at least one episode, and viewership averaged more than 14 million viewers each evening, making it the most watched program ever to air on PBS. Was awarded more than 40 major television and film honors. A companion book to the documentary was released shortly after the series aired. Its filmography was groundbreaking for the time and spawned film techniques such as the Ken Burns effect. Its theme song, Ashokan Farewell, is widely acclaimed, and we'll look into that in a moment. The series was extremely influential, that's putting it lightly, and serves as the main source of knowledge about the Civil War to many Americans. Indeed, it is their only source of perception about the Civil War. However, some historians have criticized its historical accuracy, especially its lack of coverage of slavery as a cause of the war. Which is intriguing because if you look at one of the historians that they interviewed exclusively, Shelby Foote, he stated that he believed that the miniseries gave a little too much credence to slavery as a cause of the Civil War. Very fascinating. So again, you already see that back and forth towards the perception of it, and when it was made and what different people think. Of course, everyone will say, well, Shelby Foote was a Southern historian, so naturally that's going to be his point of view. It's a fair observation to make. The series was rebroadcast in June 1994 as a lead-up to baseball, then remastered for its 12th anniversary in 2002, although it remained in standard definition resolution. To commemorate the film's 25th anniversary and the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's assassination, the film underwent a complete digital restoration to high-definition format in 2015. Matthew Brady's photographs inspired Burns to make The Civil War, which in 9 episodes totaling more than 10 hours, yes, it's quite a slog, explores the war's military, social, and political facets through some 16,000 contemporary photographs and paintings and excerpts from letters and journals of persons famous and obscure. The series' slow zooming and panning across still images was later termed the Ken Burns effect. Burns combined these images with modern cinematography, music, narration by David McCullough, anecdotes and insights from authors such as Shelby Foote, who we mentioned before, historians Barbara J. Fields, Ed Bears, and Stephen B. Oates, and actors reading contemporary quotes, from historical figures such as Abraham Lincoln, Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, Walt Whitman, Stonewall Jackson, and Frederick Douglass, as well as diaries by Mary Chestnut, Samuel Watkins, Elijah Hunt Rhodes, he comes up a lot in that series, and George Templeton Strong, and commentary from James W. Symington. A large cast of actors voiced correspondence, memoirs, news articles, and stood in for historical figures from the Civil War. Burns also interviewed Daisy Turner, then a 104-year-old daughter of an ex-slave whose poetry features prominently in the series. Turner died in February 1988, a full 2.5 years before the series aired. So very interesting, this was made in 1990, and Daisy Turner is the closest we get to an exact link or someone who is actually there, and she was separated by a full generation. And that is indeed one of the challenges that you have when You make a film in the 1980s about something that occurred well over a century ago. Now let's look at this, the Ashokan Farewell. The Ashokan Farewell is a piece of music composed by the American folk musician Jay Unger in 1982. The tune was used as the title theme of the 1990 PBS television miniseries The Civil War. Despite its late date of composition, it was included in the 1991 compilation album Songs of the Civil War. And you may have heard the Ashokan Farewell. It goes something like this. Used in the Civil War documentary series. In 1984, filmmaker Ken Burns heard Ashokan Farewell and was moved by it. It is a very good song. He used it in two of his documentary films, Huey Long and The Civil War, which features the original recording by Fiddle Fever in the beginning of the film. The Civil War drew the greatest attention to the piece. It is played 25 times throughout the 11-hour series. Basically any time something very dramatic happens, such as including during the emotional reading of Sullivan Ballew's letter to his wife in the first episode. In fact, that's how the first episode ends, is with the emotional reading of Sullivan Ballew's letter to his wife. Why do I bring this up? Why am I highlighting the Ashokan Farewell? This was a song that was composed in 1982, and yet to most people, they perceive that song as something that's contemporary from the Civil War. That was a song that was composed during the Civil War, and there is the reason why it's played repeatedly throughout the series, 25 times. It is an emotional piece of music, and it does underscore the series brilliantly, but it also shows how we can change perceptions and even develop a new perception in terms of something that was composed in 1982 and have it imposed in an event that occurred from 1861 to 1865. And I'm not saying that Ken Burns did that intentionally or he was trying to achieve anything with malintent. I'm simply stating that look at how that affected perception and how that can change what people view in terms of being contemporary for a historical event. This is why it is very difficult to determine what really happened in history. Because even if you have someone who studies something and they have good intentions and they're very passionate about it, as Ken Burns clearly is passionate about the Civil War, they're still going to impose their own personal touches on it. And that can change the greater perception, especially when you have a medium such as film that reaches so many different people. Just something to be aware of as we go forward. Pictured here on the left is Sullivan Ballew. He was a major from the Rhode Island militia and died in the first major battle of the Civil War, the Battle of Bull Run, or Manassas Junction, as the South called it. And that's another interesting thing about the Civil War. Just about every major battle has two names. The Union gave it a name, and then the Confederacy gave it a name. Sullivan Ballew wrote a very emotional letter to his wife that was not mailed, and despite the fact that he was an officer and apparently in legal practice in Rhode Island, we don't have a picture of him. We just have a lithograph, a drawing. The individual on the right is Elijah Hunt Rhodes. He started as a soldier, again from the Rhode Island, and you hear his voice a lot if you watch Ken Burns' Civil War, because I think any time there's a major battle or whatever else, they reference his diary and you hear his voice, and basically he becomes a main character through the series, even though he starts as a soldier and works his way up through the ranks as it progresses. Just to show you two individuals, we do have a picture of Elijah Hunt Rhodes and just a lithograph of Sullivan Ballew on the left. And this is what the series gives you for your battles. Wonderful maps with great graphics, blue representing the Union, red representing the Confederacy, and these are how every battle look. And they put in the sound effects, the cannons going off, the musket rifle fire, the volley fire, and they throw in the rebel yell, and then they have the good composed music, although mostly it's just the sound effects. But this is how they depict battles all through the Civil War. It's just something important to note. No, not expecting them to have video footage. They didn't have video cameras back then, but they did have cameras, and that's always a touching point, is that we don't have any good imagery or any photographs of major battles. Was it possible? Was it because nobody wanted to take the risk? What kind of photographs do we have? Well, that's something else we're going to be taking a look at as we move forward. This is a scene from the movie Gettysburg. This came out in 1993. This was heavily inspired by Ken Burns' The Civil War, and in fact, Ken Burns even has a small role as an extra. He's General Hancock's aide who tells the general he has to get down during the major charge of Pickett during the third day of the battle. This is from the end of that disastrous charge, and Gettysburg is widely regarded as the turning point of the war, and it was when everything started going downhill for the Confederacy. This powerful scene right here, portrayed brilliantly by Richard Jordan in the role of General Armistead, a Confederate general who attempted to lead the unsuccessful infantry assault on the Union lines in the third day of Gettysburg. And here he's just been shot, and Union officers are attending to him, and he wants to speak to his old friend General Hancock, who's the Union 2nd Corps commander. And he finds out from a Union officer that General Hancock has been struck down. And during this emotional scene, as he's dying, he's trying to convey the fact that he is sorry for what happened to General Hancock. And there's a lot of debate as to what he was actually saying he was sorry for, although if you look at the scene straight, it just seems as though he's simply sorry for the fact that they have to be fighting for each other. These are two individuals on opposite sides in a brutal war who are still showing humanity towards each other, and to me this is considered the defining scene of Gettysburg. This is also different because this goes back to the brother fighting brother, yet brother still appreciating brother mentality that comes out of the Civil War. Well, that perception was playing high in the early 90s, but then we had another film that came out later at the end of the 90s. Well, actually it came out in, memory serves, 2002, 2003, Gods and Generals. And instead of featuring one battle, this featured a series of battles. This basically featured the first 2, almost 3 years of the Civil War. And you get a completely different depiction in this movie, and a lot of people considered it Confederate propaganda, as though the pendulum swang back the other way. You have really strange scenes where Jeff Daniels here, playing the same role that he did in the first movie as Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, is giving a bizarre talk about Caesar, we're about to die, salute you, before the disastrous Union attack in Fredericksburg. I also want to note that the overcoats that the Union soldiers are wearing appear gray in this scene. Now, I don't know if that's historical or if that was just a filmmaking choice, but this is the Union, the North. They're supposed to be wearing blue, and yet most of their soldiers are wearing gray overcoats. It's just a fascinating observation. To close the point on comparing Gettysburg and Gods and Generals, we see how perceptions change, how they go back and forth, how it goes from brother against brother, and then, well, we can't have that. We need to have a very pro-Confederate movie made because we know how everyone's going to react to that, because how else can they react to it? And that's what keeps things going in that perspective. I wanted to take a look at the Civil War, the book, because I do remember watching the original film. And I also remember, after watching the film, reading the book. Now, this is an illustrated history by Jeffrey C. Ward with Rick Burns and Ken Burns. So the director of the Civil War, the miniseries, is also a contributing author on this book. The reason this stood out to me is I remember watching the miniseries and the various effects that it had on me at the time. And then I also remember how reading the book affected me. And one of the things that stayed with me was just how different the book was to the movie. Now, you can always say, well, that's going to be different, but this is an illustrated history. And there were some very amazing differences in terms of perception and then the outlook of the Civil War. The pictorial history of the Civil War in the book seemed to contrast with the movie. And my impression at the time was that it was a much more gloomy tale of what was really going on. Yes, it's a terrible war. Over 500,000 Americans died in it. And yet, at the same time, it was some type of reset. Now, mainstream history tells us it was a reset in American society. We ended slavery in the United States, and that's what the official history says, even though it took 100 years or more to start to fully reconcile society. And there were a lot of lingering issues that have been discussed in many facets. But nevertheless, I wanted to explore this book and take a look at this time to try to get an idea of what it could have been telling us and pose some questions to you and see what you may think when you see these pictures and some of these things I'm about to point out. So here we have Federal sailors, black and white, being entertained aboard the ironclad Hunchback. This is intriguing because we see these sailors here, and of course, one of the things that's a recurring theme in American military history was that the United States military was not fully desegregated until the Korean War. Yes, there were exceptions, there were detachments, there were support units, and so forth. But here on this ironclad in the United States Navy during the Civil War, we have what's very clearly an integrated crew and fully desegregated. Fascinating photo because you see how some of the sailors look, not having shoes. Now, there could have been a duty reason for that. But it's an intriguing image, and again, it poses more questions than it answers. But this is just the start. And of course, here we have a picture of the Union River ironclad here on the top, and very interesting low water line on it. Very unique craft that we saw, steam driven, of course, at the time, paddle steamers that they had converted to ironclads in the Union's campaign to seize control of the Mississippi primarily, which apparently they were very successful with. If we go off the mainstream history of the Civil War, by 1863 they had achieved control of the Mississippi with the capture of Vicksburg, and had essentially won control of the main waterways at that time. In the lower left, we see a picture of the USS Monitor, which was a very unique craft and was designed and innovated by the Union for the Civil War to counter the Confederacy's conversion of what was formerly the USS Merrimack into its own ironclad. And just for everybody's edification, if you don't know, an ironclad were the first wooden craft boats that were covered with iron siding. And this was considered a new and radical development in naval warfare, and it completely changed the face of everything. Again, something that happened right after 1850, and yet something that was always with us at the same time. So make of it what you will, but they're interesting pictures and they're interesting craft from any era. And I remember learning about it the first time in the 1990s, and I was surprised at how advanced the technology was. And the fact that there was that kind of technology, especially this rotating turret on the USS Monitor. Now, supposedly they couldn't fire the two guns at the same time. They had to fire them in sequence. One would fire and then the other would fire. In any event, just a picture here of a Union encampment, and in the background you can kind of see some towers and some buildings if this is near Washington, D.C., which I presume it is based on the picture caption. Fascinating positioning of where this cannon is, and then you see what appears to be a built-up wall or fortification, but who knows exactly how old this is. Is this supposed to be sandbagging? Is this dirt? Is this something else? Not exactly sure. But it's an interesting photo to show us some of the positioning of the armies. And okay, yes, there were soldiers, and I don't know where they're pointing this cannon towards. It's fascinating. Before they went off to war, soldiers often had themselves photographed alongside the wife or sweetheart they had to leave behind. Very interesting, because the impression that we have is that the availability of photography was limited at that time. But it looks like we've got a Union soldier here on the left with his wife, and then I think this is a Confederate soldier on the right with his wife as well. But fascinating that they would go to those lengths, and we know photography was still new, and I can understand why we'd have lithographs or paintings, but it seems as though photography was widely available, and that's the impression that these kind of pictures give us. And again, here's another interesting one. Of course, we have mention here in the text of Sullivan Blue being killed, although we don't have a picture of him, we just have a lithograph. The names of the soon-to-be separated couples on these pages are unknown. So, interesting pictures, well-equipped and well-decked out in their uniforms, and looks like their respective wives are wearing their very best dress for the pictures. Interesting that he's holding a musket. Fascinating imagery, and yet at the same time, it continues to tell the story that there was widespread availability of photographs, that anybody could get a photograph. Just something to be aware of. I like this picture, and the reason being is that we have several images of very large buildings. I mean, it almost looks like you have modern garages here, although we can see train tracks pulling into them. And we see a lot of activity here. Interesting building here with a lot of detail in it. Look at that. All those fine little arches there above amazing windows, and then just a tower. And then, of course, you got some more towers over here. Possibly a church, or it could be something else. Very well built out block here. Amazing buildings, a lot of detail in them. And something else to note in the photo, we can actually see a large formation of soldiers moving here, and a lot of equipment and wagons, and the photo easily captures it. So we don't see blurs or anything like that. This is very intriguing here in the foreground. Yeah, it's very well-developed telegraph pole, perhaps. It's interesting how many times you see that. And I also like all the railing here on the side of this very, very well-developed bridge. Quite remarkable. Interesting photo. And then, of course, we have our favorite person from Ken Burns' The Civil War, Elijah Hunt Rhodes. I think he does half of the narration in the film. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you do hear a lot from Elijah Hunt Rhodes. It's interesting. The Sumter Light Guards, Company K of the 4th Regiment of the Georgia Volunteers. So, alluding to this being at Fort Sumter potentially, and of course we see the early version of the Confederate flag. What I find interesting about this photo, in addition to the trudged up ground, which could be for many different reasons, is just how well equipped all of these soldiers are. And we're always told that the Confederacy had a struggle with uniforms, that they often couldn't fully equip their soldiers. A lot of times they were supposedly marching barefoot. And of course, who knows what the ground truth was, but this photograph seems to convey a very well-equipped military unit. And the building back here is very interesting and well developed as well. So many unique details in this photo that definitely pose additional questions. This equestrian statue of Andrew Jackson had already been standing for 6 years in Jackson Square at New Orleans, the city Old Hickory had saved from the British in 1815 when Benjamin Butler became military governor. But he felt compelled to order carved into its pedestal a fresh Jacksonian slogan, calculated to enrage the citizenry: "The Union must and shall be preserved." So apparently that was inscribed in there, even though the statue had been standing for a while. Very amazing building back here. And I know when John Levi did his video looking at some of the bird's eye views, he was quite amazed by what he saw with New Orleans. And this is an amazing building right here that we see in New Orleans. Look at the towers, the central spire, big huge clock in the middle. And of course, we've got all the pillars and the columns and all the mainstays that apparently were just so easy to throw up prior to 1861. It's quite remarkable. Ah, yes. Our famous Federal aeronauts, the Federal Balloon Corps. Federal troops employ 2 of Professor Thaddeus Lowe's horse-drawn hydrogen generators to inflate his observation balloon, the Intrepid, above left. Then, firmly tethered against errant winds, Lowe himself rises to survey enemy positions. Yeah, I gotta say, in all of our perceptions of the Civil War, how many times do we think about horse-drawn hydrogen generators to fill a balloon? Yes, we know they had to fill these balloons with something. I guess it's probably good that Mr. Lowe was well above the range of any effective Confederate fire. They were filled with hydrogen, because we know if a bullet passed through one of those, what could have potentially happened. It's very interesting because McClellan, who was the Union commander who was known for struggling with acquiring intelligence and oftentimes overestimating the strength of the Confederacy, again going from the mainstream account, even though McClellan's Union army frequently outnumbered the Confederate army 4-1 or more, he always seemed to be reluctant to take aggressive action. And yet in 1864 found himself as a presidential candidate running against the great Abraham Lincoln, according to our mainstream account. So fascinating pictures of the balloons, and that's always an interesting story to me that, yes, we had balloons and we could fly back in the 1860s. Oh, we had hydrogen generators, even if they were horse-drawn. We still had hydrogen generators. Fascinating. I'm not going to say much about this photo. We have a lot of pictures of bodies from the Civil War, and supposedly showing battlefield dead. Apparently this was a Confederate artillery crew, and we know that the bodies had to be rearranged at some point for this photo, but there's just some very interesting details that you see in these pictures. And it could just be because of the nature of how they died or how the bodies were rearranged, but I'll let you draw your own conclusions, look at it very carefully, and see what you think. It's definitely one of the recurring types of photos that you see from the Civil War, the United States Civil War, which is of battlefield dead. Ah, yes. And our depiction of General Ambrose Burnside attacking Confederate forces in the Battle of Antietam. This was called Burnside's Bridge right here. Very well-made bridge. Of course, the most important detail is that this is a painting, because this is as close as you get to actual live battlefield footage from the U.S. Civil War. It does call into mind, though, why couldn't a photographer have positioned themselves up in one of these high positions, and it wouldn't have been too difficult to get a picture of an assault on a bridge. It would have been very dramatic, but it never happened, not a single time during the war. People tell me, well, they went to trench warfare in 1864 in the Battle of Petersburg. Yes, they did, and it's funny that we don't see reenactors do that trench warfare, probably because it's not nearly as enjoyable to do as classic Napoleonic tactics. But nevertheless, that's still 4 solid years where some photographer could have parked themselves up on a ridgeline and attempted to get a battle picture, especially with all the time it would have taken these large formations to slowly march into position to exchange volley fire. Now, if the Civil War happened as we're told it happened, they definitely had a lot of courage and bravery, and that's something that's always related from it. And I certainly don't want to discredit that. And we know something horrible happened in the Civil War, and it could be exactly as we're told, but at the same time, I think it's important to examine it and ask questions. If it happened as we're told, that's great, then we need to further understand it. But I think there's too many questions to ignore. Ah, yes, the construction of the U.S. Capitol, which continued during the Civil War. And we can see that they're building the top of the dome and the rotunda here. And on this channel, if you've watched, you've seen we've looked at several U.S. state capitals. And of course, we have the pillars here. I would just love to see just one picture where they're putting these pillars and these columns in position. It would just be so amazing to see. Even on the outside, but on the inside, of course, it's the same thing, and it's quite remarkable. You do have some cranes here. The other thing that's interesting about this photo is that you also have this interesting picket fence here. Remarkable building right here on the grounds, too. Looks very well developed. And then what appear to be some guard shacks, maybe, that are fully built out. Nice little bridge there, little walking path, and then just completely cleared out grounds. It's very interesting. Many intriguing questions from this photo. This is very disturbing because here we have pictures of many Civil War veterans and their injuries. And this is almost a grotesque and gruesome display to me. And I find it fascinating that they got these soldiers. Some of them, it looks like they're holding up their names as to who they were and where they were. And then this grotesque depiction of their injuries. And I don't know why they would do that. Now, apparently this was from the section of the book Most Hallowed Ground, 1864, which was towards the end of the war, although they tend to depict the heavy casualties, Grant's overland campaign, and how brutal and bloody it was, and so forth. But here we're looking back, and we're just seeing human beings used as display pieces. Now, the explanation we're given is, well, photography was new then, and of course they wanted to show us how brutal and horrific war was, and what better way? We're not actually going to show battle photographs. Those are too difficult or impossible to get. But we are going to show you plenty of photographs of bodies and horrific injuries. Very interesting. It's a random building here, whether it's a courthouse or whatever. I didn't pull the caption down on this one, but again, you see the same thing with the amazing columns and this remarkable building. Even though this should have been a new building, though, it does seem to give appearances of weathering and being older. So again, more questions coming up than answers when we look carefully at these photos. And for this photograph right here, led by its regimental band, the 96th Pennsylvania marches by column of companies, the formation in which they would rush into battle. So we can get photographs of formations, and we can show camps pretty effectively. Again, you have this arid appearance to the terrain, but it could be the season, it could just be where they are, it could be the presence of the army. There's many different explanations for it. Again, it's just another one of those consistencies that I notice looking at these photos. Maybe there's a deeper story in it, maybe not, but it does come up a lot. And this photo proves that, yes, they could get a photograph of an army moving in formation. And this isn't a large formation. This looks like this is just a company-size element, 60 to 180 soldiers. It was like this picture here. U.S. Grant at left enjoys a cigar after Lookout Mountain is safely in Union hands. So later in the Civil War, after the Battle of Chickamauga and then the subsequent Battle of Chattanooga. Very fascinating, though, because you can just see Grant hanging out here. He's smoking a cigar, and that's the image with him. But you almost see a structure back here. If this is a house or what, I'm not sure. If I'm just seeing things. But again, we know that the fight didn't actually reach the top of Lookout Mountain. And I've been to Lookout Mountain, and it's a very beautiful, gorgeous view. And Tennessee is a very beautiful state, really any time of year, in my humble opinion. But again, just another interesting photograph that poses a lot of different questions. Classical columns mark the site of the Bank of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, burned along with the business district in which it stood by Jubal Early's Confederate raiders. So we saw destruction photographs of cities in the South, especially Columbia, Charleston, and Atlanta. Everybody's well aware of that. But this is Chambersburg in Pennsylvania. And here we have the great classical columns, and it's destroyed, and supposedly this was done by a raid. And one aspect of a raid is that the Confederates were going into Union territory late in the war. And when we try to find explanations for how they achieved this kind of destruction, it's a little bit more difficult because it's not as though the Confederate Army brought large mortars with them, like we're told the Union Army did. How did they achieve this level of destruction? They just set a fire and then off it went? Maybe that's what happened. Maybe there was a large ammunition storage depot all over Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, or maybe as part of their raid, early soldiers brought all the demolition equipment they needed with them. Although, when you're doing a raid, the last thing you want to be doing is carrying a lot of heavy equipment, because a raid is always a swift attack on an objective followed by a swift withdrawal before the enemy surrounds you and destroys you. Very interesting. The immense slaughter of our brave men chills and sickens us all. Gideon Wells. This is really unique because when I see this type of burial service going on, why aren't they putting the bodies all the way in the ground? I wonder if there's some mortuary reason for not doing this. I mean, it looks like they're just putting the bodies on top of the ground and then stacking dirt and grass on top of them. If anybody in the comments can give me an idea for why they may do something like this, perhaps this is just a temporary burial and then they're going to actually rebury them in the ground. But when I see something like this, and it just seems like they're not going all the way with finishing the burial. So, not really sure about this one. Maybe it's questions that I shouldn't be asking, but I'm still going to ask, especially if I don't know. Now, this is a really unique photo because in this photo, you see the classic photograph of destruction, yet the terrain in the background is pretty interesting too, because it almost looks like you have some large-scale lookout positions potentially, and the shape of the rock is remarkable. And again, we just have people all over the place here. And at last, we want to take a look at Lee's Arlington home. Lee's Arlington home is an interesting structure, and here we have a picture of Union soldiers lounge on the front steps of Lee's Arlington home. Arlington literally being right next door, actually in the confines of Washington, D.C., depending what time frame you're looking at. The famous saying was that General Robert E. Lee, the commander of Confederate armies, from his house could actually see the lights of Washington, D.C. quite easily. Obviously, didn't spend much time there as they fled shortly after the war started, and Lee's home remained under the occupation of federal soldiers throughout the duration of the war. And yes, we see some federal soldiers here. Let's get a little better look at this one. They look very relaxed, very chilled. It's almost like it's picnic time at Lee's house. Let's hang out, we got our legs crossed. I mean, yes, I understand this is potentially a secure position, but technically they are in Virginia, which is enemy territory. And again, you'd never know it looking at this photo. It looks like these soldiers are on leave, and they've been on leave for months, and they have no intention of being off leave. Look at these amazing pillars and columns. Amazing columns here on the Lee house. The construction with these windows. Remarkable building. Officers of the 8th New York State Militia at Arlington House, June 1861. So this is a state militia out of New York, and look how amazingly well equipped they are. Now, granted, that's a little easier to explain with the Union armies, because supposedly the Union had these amazing factories and a vast industrial advantage over the Confederacy. But I always wondered about that, how, especially with the Confederacy, even the fact that they were able to raise, train, and equip an army in a very short amount of time and not having the industrial strength that the Union did. We're always told that for total war, and especially with mass mobilization, having industrial strength is very important. It was supposedly a decisive advantage of the United States during World War II, was its industrial strength. And yet we see photos like this. I mean, yes, these are all officers, so of course they're going to be very well dressed. But just seeing a state militia this well equipped, and like even the soldier back here looks very well equipped. Why does this photo have something strange about it? I don't know. And this is what I'd expect a militia to look like, just a rabble of people wearing whatever and trying to resemble some sort of military formation, although you see younger individuals with this formation. Who exactly knows what's going on here? It's just a remarkable photo, though, from the time of the Civil War that gives you a contrasting picture of what's actually going on. Large group of people moving somewhere. Looks like they've got some horses, some wagons, but what's really going on here? Not exactly sure. Civilian volunteers patrol the lawn of the Executive Mansion in April 1861, waiting for the Northern Army to arrive. Ah, yes, very well-equipped civilian volunteers. They've got their top hats on, and looks like they've got all their muskets with their bayonets fixed, and they're ready to go. No one's getting to the Executive Mansion. Wonder why we stopped calling the White House the Executive Mansion. There's almost a little bit of interesting concepts with that title, but nevertheless, that's what they called it then. Again, very beautiful building in 1861. Of course, the Executive Mansion or White House, it's always been there, and it's always been amazing. So we're told. This is what the Arlington House looks like today, as it's part of Arlington National Cemetery near the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Built by Lee's father-in-law, G.W.P. Custis, in 1803 to 1818. This building stands today, and it is over 200 years old. Well, at least they gave a little bit of credibility by saying it actually took them 15 years to build this with these incredible columns and this detail. I mean, who builds a house like this at any time frame? Look at these amazing chimneys on it. I mean, it just baffles the mind. I mean, could you imagine the Hiltons having amazing columns or pillars like this on any house that they built? No, I didn't think so. Stratford Hall Plantation House, built 1738. This is where Robert E. Lee, commander of the Confederate Army, was born. Amazing building, 1738. Remarkable. Chimneys and the array of bricks and the stairs, and just unbelievable that someone could build something like this in the United States in 1738 when it was still a British colony. Just remarkable. Now, I wanted to compare and contrast to close out the video because we always say that the format and what we call plantations are south of the Mason-Dixon line. Well, this is the Four Mounds Estate in Dubuque, Iowa. I'm kidding. Dubuque, Iowa. Four Mounds Estate is what was known as a gentleman's farm. Apparently there was a movement in the United States that I was unaware of until I just happened to run across this estate, which is now being operated as a bed and breakfast, as many of the older buildings seem to be across the United States in Dubuque. And it's an amazing residence, and apparently the gentleman's farm concept was a lot of wealthier people felt they needed to return to the land in the agrarian ways. So rather than just building their amazing estate out in the country, they built an entire farm. And the reason I call this to attention is that in the South, we always call it a plantation. And we have it associated with those connotations of working the land, harvesting the cotton. But in the North, we had farms, and the other story is there was no concept of laying out plantations in the North. And yet, when you look at some of these so-called gentlemen's farms, where you have the large house and then the servants' quarters, which these gentlemen's farms do tend to have on them, it kind of reminds you of the layout of the plantation in the South. The saying here is actually something that I had for my students back in the day. First knowledge becomes a process of conforming. All right, perfect. Thank you. So this was from one of the very early explorations I did, why it's important to ask questions. But believe it or not, this was something that I had from my teaching days, and I would show my students to start our entire history lesson. And yes, in the interest of full disclosure, I did actually used to teach a Civil War lesson. But it's important to ask questions because what you see here is the actual presentation of how perceptions can be shaped with a picture. So you have the same picture, but you have three different historical accounts with each picture. Historical account 1, it's a dedication ceremony. It's an amazing building that took years to complete. Caption 2, this is the dedication of a major monument across the road from this building. So there's a monument that you can't see that this picture is being taken from. And then account 3, it's a large group of refugees from a war-torn land celebrating their arrival. Now, we know which one of these is correct according to the history, but the reason I show this is this just goes to show how a picture alone, even if it's real and authentic, you can have your perceptions changed on it. And suddenly first knowledge becomes a process of conforming. So in other words, once someone informs you of something and it's the first time you learn it, it becomes very difficult to unlearn something. Hey, Sooner West, good to see you. And so the whole point of learning and unlearning is that becomes our perception and that becomes our reality. And what I want you to do as we go through this on the Civil War is drop what you think you know, drop all the theories that I've shared so far, because we're really going to look at it in detail. Sky Sage, good to see you. I see you. Oh, yeah. And for those of you who aren't from the United States, we'll just go ahead and dive into this now. Where does the Civil War really come from? A lot of our perceptions are currently shaped by the film The Civil War by Ken Burns. Now, prior to this, it was very difficult to find photographs of the Civil War. They were not readily available. You only found them in certain books. And it really wasn't easy to ascertain exactly what was going on. And we'll get to all the different aspects of the Civil War. But the reason I start with the whole Ken Burns film is this is how a lot of people believe that the Civil War went down. It's the way Ken Burns told the story. Now, Ken Burns is a documentary filmmaker. Oh, yeah. And prior to this, perceptions of the Civil War changed quite a bit. So if you go back to Gone with the Wind, a film that came out in the late 1930s, that shaped American perceptions of the Civil War. Then in the 1970s, things seem to change again. And if you watch old episodes of Little House on the Prairie, if you look at The Outlaw Josie Wales, you'll see that there seemed to be a little bit more of a sympathetic tone to the Confederacy. But, oh yeah. And it was a long time ago that I did those Civil War videos. You're right. So, in any event, the documentary film by Ken Burns, The Civil War, is a PBS film. And after that, suddenly you saw all of these different photos from the Civil War. And Ken Burns is a very good documentary filmmaker. I mean, just gotta have to call it like I see it. And here's what Ken Burns looks like, for those of you who don't know. And he's pictured here with Shelby Foote, who's a Southern author from Mississippi, no less. And if you haven't seen the documentary, The Civil War, Ken Burns does it with a bunch of different images that he found and does slow camera reveal with a soundtrack, a Hollywood cast to do voiceovers for all the famous figures from the Civil War. And then he consults various historians, such as Shelby Foote here. Now, the interesting thing about Shelby Foote, though, yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of people who say that, and a lot of people who believe that. And like I said, much like in the way that Carl Sagan speaks, Carl Sagan speaks very clearly and articulately. Ken Burns presents a documentary film very effectively. I mean, he knows exactly how to convey it. He's very good at it. And so that's really where this comes from. A lot of people, their first knowledge of the Civil War was from watching this film and what Ken Burns and Shelby Foote told them. And so that's where it all started. Now, where things start to get a little bit more dicey. When you look into the history of Shelby Foote, so this is Shelby Foote down here, after he passed away a couple years ago, more details on his personal history became available, which I always found interesting because let's just say that Shelby Foote had some perceptions that weren't exactly very popular. He was, well, nowadays they'd call him a Southern sympathizer, and he believed in the Confederate flag and what it stood for. And, that's just, something you can't say now. But all beside that, going past Shelby Foote and Ken Burns, they shaped the perceptions of the Civil War. Now, I saw some of you already talking about the problematic images of the Civil War. And so we'll go down to our first banner here. Here's my baseline assumptions of the Civil War. Assumptions. The conflict did occur. A conflict occurred that had loss of life and material destruction. Now, oh yeah, absolutely, Jamie. All very informative and convincing for people who don't care to think. And it's presented very well. And I always find it funny that the opening theme tune for Ken Burns' Civil War is Ashokan Farewell, a song that was composed in the early 1980s. I mean, just imagine if we would have picked some other song for it. But you were all talking about how a lot of the images are problematic, and that's something I've covered in the other Civil War videos, and we'll just look at a couple of them. So here are some of those problematic images, and these are supposedly, this is a Confederate defensive position in South Carolina, very well constructed building here that certainly matches what we'd later affiliate with Beaux Arts, although Beaux Arts goes from 1800 to 1900, so hard to say anything here. And then this nice tower in the background, and we'll look at a couple more. This is what we have for our Civil War battle photography. It's a painting. There is no photography of actual battles from the Civil War. Yeah, exactly. And you are all correct with all those comments. So, well, thanks for joining us, Daniel. Oh yeah. And these paintings are actually what you have the nearest thing to battle photography. So, anyway. So back to assumptions. Conflict did occur, but this is what we're going off of. Now, we have all kinds of strange images with a lot of posing from the war, where you'll see soldiers in different states of dress. Isn't this grotesque? But what you notice is they seem to be well equipped. They're wearing consistent uniforms, although you do get a little bit of a conflict on the blue and the gray. So the North, the Union wore blue, supposedly. The South, the Confederacy wore gray, or so we're told. But then you have other images like this, and one of the shaping aspects of the United States Civil War was the Mexican War, where the United States managed to invade Mexico in the 1840s and sustain long lines of logistics and communications and capture Mexico City and won the war. That's where a lot of the Civil War veterans supposedly got their experience from. Ah, yes. Oh, yeah. Well, and when we see some other images, you'll see what the problems are with that, so... Yeah, so we're told, Christina, so we're told. But moving on with the presentations of images, you also have a lot of bizarre images such as this, where it looks like everybody's just out camping, having a good time. You have some of the limitations in photography seen back here. Basically, there's no such thing as an uninteresting Civil War photo. If you look at it closely enough, you can find all kinds of interesting aspects to it. Everybody always seems to be posing. Everyone's very relaxed. Now, it is true that soldiers can be very relaxed, but we always see odd things with different individuals, different ranks, different uniforms, the blue and the gray. This is an interesting one, though, that I like to show because what this shows you is an entire formation, in other words, a unit of soldiers. And supposedly they're marching, but yet we don't seem to have any issue with any of the blurring, although we do with the horses. So it's hard to tell what's going on. Now, I mean, they could just be there stationary in a formation, and that's when they caught the picture, but it's odd when you try to consider the technical accuracy. Yeah, there you go, Kathy. And that's what they be told too, especially by a non-commissioned officer these days. Yeah, a bunch of slackers. You're absolutely right. But that's what we tend to see. And yet we're supposed to take all this at face value. So it's rather strange. So right off the bat, the images that, by the way, we didn't have access to, a lot of them prior to the Civil War by Ken Burns, which was released in 1990, they changed. You also have a lot of soldiers posing with their significant others. Now, there's nothing too out of the ordinary about that, but yet when we consider how many of these images that we have, I mean, there are hundreds, if not thousands of these images, soldiers on both sides who had access to photography, even though we're told it was limited, and they posed with their significant other. We also have this strange view of the landscape, many locations in the South where we're told that the battles occurred. And if you've been around Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Florida, anywhere around that area, this isn't exactly the kind of terrain you expect to see. It's really weird. It almost looks like the Dust Bowl, as though the terrain's desiccated. Now, could the pictures have been taken somewhere in the north during the winter? Sure. But if you look closely enough, you get that running theme with it. Oh, yeah. And you're right with those comments and observations. Oftentimes, there is no background with a lot of them. And so it becomes very problematic to assess what's going on and when it is. Now, I include this little image for you because this shows you how photos can be manipulated. Now, there are a lot of questionable photos from the Civil War to include all kinds of strange and bizarre occurrences, but can we rely on them? Well, did Tickle Me Elmo fight in the Civil War? I don't know. But I'm showing you this because don't forget that we do have to contend with photo manipulation. Yeah, exactly. But I'm just showing this to you to show you what can be done with photographs. And it doesn't look all that bizarre in some ways. I mean, we can tear this photograph apart, and yet this photograph would stand up to scrutiny more than some of the other ones that we've seen. Now, wouldn't it? Because you do have some very well-detailed individuals, and you have a very well-detailed Tickle Me Elmo or Oscar the Grouch or whoever you want there. So... Yep. And that's what it really boils down to. A lot of photos of people standing around. And, I'm just showing this to you to give you an example of how photos can be changed. And we all know this, but we have to be reminded of it because oftentimes when we look at photos, we see what we want to see. Oh, yeah. And you're actually seeing one of the inconsistencies with it there, Senior West. You're absolutely right. A lot of inconsistencies. So again, process of conforming. Now, we talked about the United States' ability to invade Mexico, and oddly enough, that was carried out by Winfield Scott. We'll talk about him later, but we're told that the United States won that war by launching a seaborne invasion, landing in Veracruz, and then marching across the land and capturing Mexico City. And oddly enough, they managed to sustain this difficult logistical challenge at a time when it seemed impossible. So, again, many of the U.S. Army officers on both sides of the war in the Civil War, or the Confederate States officers, served in this conflict, so it's something to be aware of. Now, we do have many books about the Civil War, and I did review this one, and I always found this very interesting in terms of how well developed this infrastructure is in Washington. I mean, look how well built this bridge is, some of these foundation blocks, and then what appears to be a train depot. Look at some of the construction on this. Very, very strange and very odd, and again, it just brings up more questions from the Civil War. What was actually the capability at the time? What was really going on? Yeah, was it a war? Was it something else? That's always the question that we have about it. But you look at any sort of photo, you look at any sort of book, and you just end up with more questions than answers. And it's very difficult to quote unquote document. So it's just something to remember. It is the mother or the father of all conflicting accounts. Yeah, that's probably a good way to summarize it there, Robert. Yeah, and there's definitely something to that. There was a lot of systematic destruction, but let's get into it a little bit more. So here we have good old Elijah Hunt Rhodes. He was one of the main characters of Ken Burns' Civil War. I don't remember who voiced him, but he gives a lot of the narration. You also have many photos of Confederate soldiers who look like they're just having a grand old time. Now, here's a question for y'all. Who wore the blue and the gray? Now, we told you that it was the Union and the South, the Confederacy, but did the United States Army have a time frame where it wore both blue and gray? What do you think? Would you be surprised to know that prior to the United States Civil War, the United States Army did wear gray, and it did wear gray as part of the Gray Line in West Point. So it's interesting for me to note that both armies wore blue and gray. And yes, you have many photos like this of destruction, although oddly enough, these destruction photos are not just set in the South. We do have a destruction photo of one in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, which was supposedly done by a raid. Now, this is a Confederate unit, and look how well equipped they are. Now, one of the constant themes we had from the United States Civil War was how poorly equipped the Confederate Army was. They oftentimes didn't have shoes. But this picture paints a very different picture. Now, does that mean it could have been different? Nice flag there, huh? Maybe. It's just, again, another conflicting account. And like I said, you can look at pictures all day under the sun from the Civil War and have more issues than you ever know what to do with. Yeah, they sure did. And that's something that we see in a lot of the photos, and it quote unquote is very well documented. So yeah, they're all very well equipped. And also keep in mind that according to the official history, that the United States Army and the Confederate States Army had never done mass mobilization. They never suited up armies of hundreds of thousands. They only fought small battles, and the Mexican War only involved a couple thousand soldiers in the regular United States Army. But suddenly they managed to pull all this off, all the logistical challenges. And here's another one of these questionable photos where you see this is clearly a column that's moving, and yet we can very well see it. Now, why is it we don't have any battle photographs? And we'll have all sorts of reasons. Well, because even though they were fighting Napoleonic tactics where they marched in slow formations, nobody wanted to really see it or take the risk of getting a picture, and so therein lies the problem. And so that's why you see a lot of images like this where you see formations marching, but you don't see any battlefield photographs, which is really strange. So, yep, exactly, Robert, exactly. And that's something that we noticed. Well, thanks, Rory. I really appreciate that. I'm glad you're enjoying it so far. So we're just getting started. We're just looking at the initial photographs that we have. So anyway, back on to where we were. So remember this, first knowledge becomes a process of conforming. You have the knowledge, you're going to conform to it. Now, this is from the Mexican War, oddly enough, nice architecture here, and this just showed us how ineffective fixed fortifications were. Chapultepec Castle, all the other star forts that we talked about. All right, now we're transitioning here. The Know Nothing Party. Now, who here has heard about the Know Nothing Party? And what is significant about the Know Nothing Party? Yeah, exactly. So we've looked at all these photos, but we have nothing to really back it up. But back to the Know Nothing Party. So the significance of the Know Nothing Party was this is supposedly a nativist political party. It was also a populist political party. And they did not like the Irish, supposedly. They did not like the Catholic Church. And supposedly this political party was so powerful that they conducted attacks in the streets against Irish, people who were Catholics, immigrants. And of course, now the Smithsonian tries to tie this into modern populist American politics, even though it has nothing to do with it. What's interesting about the Know Nothing Party, though, was that it was very active in the 1850s, and then right before the United States Civil War, it just seemed to disappear. And it's funny looking at the articles on how they try to do cheetah flips with this, intellectual cheetah flips on why the Know Nothing Party suddenly just went away. And they try to say it's because, well, they weren't relevant anymore because suddenly slavery became the issue. Even though slavery had nothing to do with the Know Nothing Party, according to the official history. And here's another strange thing. The Know Nothing Party is not really touched in Ken Burns' little Civil War. So it's really, really bizarre. And you really didn't see the Know Nothing Party talked about in detail and in historical circles until after 2000. I'm not kidding. Now, there are some books that documented them, but it's always odd how they change the emphasis on certain aspects of history and who does what and who knows what. But what's odd about the Know Nothing Party is if they did exist, it's proof that political parties are not established by grassroots Americans. They're established by a higher power. And there's no conspiracy about that. That's just the way it is, because if they were truly a grassroots populist political party, they wouldn't just go away in the snap of a finger. So let's consider the causes of the Civil War. Now remember, this is what we're told. So here you have good old General Winfield Scott. Ah, yes, this is the commander-in-chief of the United States Army at the start of the U.S. Civil War in 1861. And you can see he's in great shape there. And he could easily pass the modern U.S. Army physical fitness test. Actually, they say he couldn't even mount a horse at that time. But he's quite an interesting character. And the causes all came down to what we're told and what's been reinforced ever since Ken Burns' Civil War and long before that. The war was about slavery. Here you have John Brown. He was a radical abolitionist. And in fact, he believed that violence was the only way to end slavery. And oddly enough, the fact that John Brown was so active at the time, and believe it or not, he started off as a preacher. What's really strange, though, is that John Brown didn't become famous until the 1850s. And yet we have no shortage of photos and documentation on John Brown. It's really bizarre. It's as though this guy was suddenly made famous after the fact. And you have many, many different pictures of him without the beard, with the beard. And he launched a very famous raid. Oh, here's a little structure that he supposedly met in Iowa. Yeah, here we go, factoring into Iowa again, but nice little structure there. I find it's interesting, it's documented. He launched a little raid on Harper's Ferry, which is a federal arsenal. And supposedly that's where they were storing weapons, and he was trying to incite a slave revolt. And this guy by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee stopped him. Yeah, exactly, Annette. Great point there. That same look that you see with them as well. But we have different statements that say that the causes were down to slavery, the causes were down to states' rights, the causes were this and that. The whole reason we started with the Know Nothing Party, though, is we seem to be shifting directions. So it's a nativist party, and now slavery is evil. People are willing to fight a war over slavery. Yeah, and you know what, Sky Sage? Harper's Ferry is an old world treasure trove. I need to do an on-site exploration of that. But anyway, that's what we're told the causes were. And you can actually go back and look at interviews with Shelby Foote, and even he talks about how they're kind of changing the perception of the Civil War. Now, who knows exactly what happened? But one of his complaints, and this is Shelby Foote's words, is that Ken Burns was making the Civil War a little too much about slavery and not enough about what the original causes actually were. But it's quite intriguing how it goes back and forth. Now, this is what Shelby Foote said. I'm quoting him, and he's been passed away. And if you look at Shelby Foote's biography, it's quite interesting as well. The author who kind of disagreed with Ken Burns, but liked Ken Burns because Ken Burns made him famous being on the Civil War. And they have this nice little statue erected to the memory of John Brown in Kansas. And so, very interesting. And of course, we have a plaque, so we know not to question it, right? Now, technology of the Civil War. This is where things get really interesting, because we're told that the technology of the Civil War was a leap ahead. We had the Industrial Revolution going on at that time. We know that the North had a submarine, the USS Alligator. I did not know that the North had a submarine. I was aware that they tried to turtle during the U.S. Revolutionary War. It didn't work so well. And I was aware that the Confederates had the Hunley and did one attack with it. But apparently the North had the USS Alligator, a full-up submarine. So I don't know if you're aware of that. I've covered that in the technology video. They also innovated the Gatling gun, the predecessor to the machine gun, and it was used quite effectively. So this shows the sudden technological advances in the United States Civil War. Then you also have this hydrogen pump that was used to inflate the balloon, the Intrepid, the Union Aerial Balloon Corps. So they had balloons. Isn't this a great picture? What do y'all think of this picture? Yeah, I can't argue with you on that one, that's for sure. Oh yeah, and that's proof of that as well. So just a sudden technological leap that's very, very unbelievable, and yet at the same time, we're told that they had this capability the entire time. Here you got Thaddeus Lowe, supposedly the civilian who ran the Union Balloon Corps. You think it'd give him a huge advantage, but old General McClellan didn't want to go with it. So let's go on to the tactics of the Civil War. So we talked about the technology. One of the things they try to tell us is that the tactics in the Civil War were very antiquated. Now, this is the Battle of Fredericksburg, where the Union attempted to launch a frontal assault against walled Confederate positions. And for whatever reason, it didn't work. And what Shelby Foote will tell you is that the reason the Civil War was so bloody, don't talk about diseases or anything like that, is their tactics were out of date. And they were massing men and marching up in straight lines and then just getting slaughtered. Well, I'm glad you caught me. And so what we have is this, we have these obsolete tactics and these obsolete medical practices, and this is how we explain these huge casualties. Now, casualty figures, if you haven't noticed, like population figures, they're very fluid. They seem to change quite frequently. And so, yeah, exactly. When you look at a lot of these battles, you just see that they're fighting shoulder to shoulder. So again, if somebody was doing a picnic and watching a battle, why couldn't they have set up old Matthew Brady and his photography team and get some pictures of them lining up? It would take forever to line up these formations. And in the Battle of Fredericksburg, we're told that there were how many different charges by the Union. And of course, they failed and they were slaughtered on the field, although who knows what the ground truth reality is. And so this is what you see with a lot of the different battles. Now, oddly enough, in Vicksburg, you see Ulysses S. Grant, of all people, who was notorious for frontal assaults, actually using some maneuver here and going around Vicksburg. So it's really strange. It's a conflicting account. Yeah, tactics should be based on weapons technology, but the excuse we're given for the large casualty figures is they didn't adapt very well. But again, there's a conflicting account with that as well, which is very intriguing. So going back to the different battles, what's odd, though, is then the Confederates decided to try a frontal assault in the famous Pickett's Charge, and they were slaughtered on day 3 in the major battle of Gettysburg, even though the Confederates had actually been fighting on the defensive most of the time. And you would think they would have seen how ineffective these horrifying frontal assaults were, and yet they still did them regardless. So it's really, really strange and bizarre. And this is supposedly a photograph of one of the cannon crews from the Union in the Battle of Gettysburg. Isn't this an interesting photo? So I'll be sure to post this on Reddit so you can analyze these on your own, because like I said, there's never a photo that doesn't bring up a lot of different questions. All right, so let's go on to the next portion here. And that's going to be massive leadership incompetence. And that's actually on both sides of the Civil War. So again, you've got more questionable aspects. You have commanders such as Ambrose Burnside here, who failed in the Battle of Fredericksburg, sent thousands of Union soldiers in futile frontal assaults to be killed, and, they even call it simply murder. It was murder. He offered his resignation after these attacks failed, but they wouldn't accept his resignation. They kept him in command, and he kept failing. And that's something you see on both sides. And it wasn't until the Battle of the Crater, when, according to the official account, they had a U.S., they called them colored troops, African-American soldier formations that were trained to assault after they detonated this bomb to create a crater, and then they changed out the formation that was going to do it, and it failed miserably. Finally, they relieved this guy. But it's really weird if you look into his history, they never wanted to relieve him. Braxton Bragg, same thing with the Confederates. He was basically the most incompetent Confederate commander, even though the guy was an experienced U.S. Army officer, and he served with distinction during the Mexican War. He even saved the president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, in the Battle of Buena Vista by using cannons effectively. We're told he was an artillery officer. But then, oddly enough, in this battle of Missionary Ridge in Chattanooga, and this is when Bragg was in command, we actually see the Union doing a frontal charge that actually works. Or as David McCullough would say in the Civil War, it worked. But the explanation they give for this frontal assault working is that it was uncoordinated and the soldiers took the initiative themselves. And oddly enough, old Braxton Bragg, despite being an artillery officer, he supposedly placed his cannon here up on the crest, the topographical crest of a hill, not on the military crest. And so what that means is that his cannons couldn't fire down on the assaulting Union soldiers. They were in the dead space right here where the cannons couldn't engage them. So a guy who knew how to properly place his cannons in the Mexican War suddenly forgot how to do it during the United States Civil War and made a huge mistake that cost him the battle. And suddenly a frontal assault actually worked. And so again, it shows this incompetence. And for whatever reason, we're told that Jefferson Davis respected this guy. He didn't relieve him. So it's really, really strange. Another account of total incompetence, things not working. Now, oddly enough, this gentleman, Arthur MacArthur, who was with a Wisconsin regiment, earned himself the Medal of Honor, highest U.S. military award, because during the assault on Missionary Ridge, he got up and held a flag and waved it around and said, "Onward, Wisconsin." They gave him the Medal of Honor for that. Well, at least they gave him the Medal of Honor for doing something successful, if it did in fact happen. You might know his son a little bit better, Douglas MacArthur. His son was awarded the Medal of Honor for preparing the defense of the Philippines, and here you can read the citation of it, although it was not a successful defense of the Philippines. But that was not on him, because if there's one thing to know about Douglas MacArthur, he did not make mistakes. It was all on his subordinates. It was subordinates' fault. They were not prepared to repel the Japanese surprise attack, and it was subordinates' fault that he was not able to defend the Bataan Peninsula. But they still gave him the Medal of Honor for it. Oh, by the way, did you know that he also tried to keep his subordinate, General Wainwright, from winning the Medal of Honor, who actually went with his soldiers and surrendered with him, and underwent this unfortunate experience called the Death March of Bataan, where U.S. soldiers and Philippine soldiers were taken and killed by the Japanese because the defense was ineffective. So I just highlight that because it shows how politics work in the United States military, and it's pretty much been the same for a long time. And I know it is very controversial to say bad things about General Douglas MacArthur, and I'm not. I'm simply upholding the fact that he doesn't make mistakes. But going back to the Civil War, we have other leaders who had all sorts of issues who were never relieved. Robert E. Lee was considered the best tactician of the Civil War, and yet we talked about earlier how he made the decision to do a fatal frontal battle of Gettysburg, even though he saw in the Battle of Fredericksburg that these tactics didn't work. So what, he just suddenly forgot it? And it's very interesting seeing the historians try to justify this. Well, Lee was an aggressive commander. He was all about doing aggressive things to achieve rapid results. Just, it resulted in occasional disaster. You also have this guy, George B. McClellan, who is Ken Burns' big hero. We brought him up many times. Supposedly, he was little Napoleon, and he was very good at training the army, but he never really won a single battle aside from defeating Robert E. Lee at the start of the war. He ran against Abraham Lincoln in 1864 and lost in the presidential election. And now we have this individual, and of course, I'm going to bring up somebody from Iowa. Absolutely right. This is Francis Marion Drake, and this is his real name. And I highlight an example because Iowa was the northern state that provided the highest percentage of soldiers. Now, not the most soldiers, obviously, that was New York, but the highest percentage of population came from Iowa. Francis Marion Drake here, though, got his unit while conducting a reconnaissance ambushed. Somehow they were ambushed by 7,000 dismounted Confederate cavalrymen. And most of his soldiers were taken prisoner and died in a prison camp in Camp Tyler in Texas, a lot of Iowans. But that didn't stop him from rising in the ranks. He became very popular because suddenly he was appointed to a court-martial commission and court-martialed his own commanding officer. How the heck that happens, I don't know. Supposedly for being drunk on duty. Probably because his commanding officer had dirt on him and was going to report him, or if any of this even happened. You know, it's just funny when you have all these stories. He would subsequently become governor of Iowa, believe it or not, for being very militarily incompetent. Nice boots, too. Check these boots out. Now, we go on to the next aspect of it. And we're going to transition because we've gone through what we're officially told about the war. Now we have some theories. Yeah, might have been. Might have been. That's for sure. So, first theory. Prisoner of war camps and soldier homes. One of the major stories from the United States Civil War was the prisoner of war camps. Both sides had extensive Civil War prisoner of war camps. And here you can see them. And supposedly these were horrible places. This is allegedly Andersonville in Georgia, where Union prisoners were kept. Many died in very squalid conditions. Here's another prisoner of war camp, supposedly up north, although it's really hard to tell. Now, here's where things get interesting. This is Fort Warren in Boston Harbor, a prisoner of war camp for Confederate soldiers. Very well constructed, isn't it? I think you know where this is going. Here's what it looks like today, and I like how they have the 1850 on it. And then you see some of the other well-constructed aspects of it. Oh, look at those blocks there. Kind of reminds me of the foundation blocks of the Iowa State Capitol. I know, I can't help but bring it up. And then you see what Fort Warren really looks like. What do you think? Oh yeah, she's a beauty. Now, do I think that these prisoner of war camps really existed? Yes. And do I think they were used as we were told that they were? Yes. And why is that? Because there are lots of accounts of many soldiers and other individuals going to these places, and they died in large numbers. And so suddenly you get the idea that what was really going on with the Civil War was that it was the chance to get rid of a lot of people. It was a different kind of conflict, and think of these as detention camps, concentration camps, relocation camps. People were held here, and they were killed, unfortunately. And we do have accounts of many Union soldiers dying in Andersonville, and then many Confederate soldiers dying in the Union prisoner of war camps because of poor conditions. Yeah, exactly. And so that's why it's one of the critical theories. Here's where it starts to get really interesting, though. Yeah, I know. That's usually my statement. This is what's called a soldier's home, and I explored this in an early exploration on the channel. This is the one in Milwaukee. So after the Civil War, they had all these soldiers' homes that were built in both the North and the South. And they had, one, this elaborate architecture, but two, these weren't single buildings, these were entire compounds. Here's one in Dayton, Ohio, and you can see some very well-constructed buildings. I don't know what the heck this is. I'm sure we'll be told it's a flagpole. Very intriguing. And then you see some other advanced architecture. But at the end of the day, they sent soldiers to these places after the Civil War to live out their lives. Exactly, Sky Sage, and that's really where the asylum campaign started. And that's where it really gets interesting, because if you think these are old world constructions that were repurposed, this is where they sent all these soldiers to live out their time and not talk about exactly what happened. Yeah, exactly, Chassis. Cell tower, you got it. And I know I'm covering a lot here pretty quick, but this is one of the first big theories here. So it wasn't just prisoner of war camps that ended with the Civil War. These soldier homes continued well into the 1900s, if not beyond. And so here you have this entire map, and you see this is a huge compound, the National Military Home in Dayton, Ohio. Large old main buildings. It can sustain itself, and yet we've seen this layout before. It's just like an asylum, and that's what they call them, soldiers' asylums. So make of that what you will. Exactly, Rebecca. Evil does know no bounds. And it's a great example right here. And so that's why you see one of the first big theories here, though, is with the prisoner of war camps. Oh, and here's another one. Isn't this an interesting building here? What was this building called? Oh, this is the quartermaster and commissary building. For those of you who don't know, the commissary is kind of like your grocery store on a military post. Well, manicured lawns and very nice domes, and nice building here. What do you think of this one? Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right, Heidi. And they had lots of rocking chairs there too, didn't they? Yeah, doesn't it? Well, this was really in Dayton, Ohio, or so we're told. Not exactly what you'd expect to see in Dayton, Ohio. Well, gee, Maxwell, you might have to look into that for us if you're on the ground there. See what you can find out about that old soldier's home and if there's anything left from it. I have not had the pleasure of being to Dayton, Ohio. Strong feelings about it. Not surprised. Not surprised. So, all right, let's go on to theory 2. And theory 2 is the Anaconda Plan. The Anaconda Plan was the brainchild of Winfield Scott. And Winfield Scott is interesting because we're told he made general in the War of 1812. And then he was serving as the commanding general of the United States Army in 1861. But as we said, his health was failing. He had gout, and you can see he doesn't appear to be the most healthy individual. But he came up with this interesting plan, the Anaconda Plan. Now, what's really strange about the Anaconda Plan is, again, this is a military and a nation that's suddenly fighting a way it never did. We see how the United States military won the Mexican War. They landed and they seized the capital of Mexico. That's how you won wars. But the Anaconda Plan is a concept of total war. And so what you're seeing is with the Anaconda Plan, it's a plan to blockade the South, destroy the cities, and control the key terrain and then wear down the nation. And yet what wasn't part of the Anaconda Plan was all these campaigns. Now, would you be surprised to know that there were land campaigns that went all over the South? So we know about Sherman's march to Atlanta, down to Savannah. We know about coming up into South Carolina, North Carolina. We know about the Army of the Potomac invading Virginia. We know about the Western forces getting down into Arkansas and Mississippi. But there was also Union campaigns that got all the way into Texas. You might remember we talked about old General Gordon Granger and how he became affiliated with the Juneteenth holiday. So it's safe to say there were military forces that were operating all over. Although, interesting enough, there was also a Confederate military raid that got into Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, and burned the city down. Now, remember that a raid is a fast operation. Yep, you're absolutely right, Celeste, and that's probably exactly what happened. And so what we see with the Anaconda Plan is it's a concept of total war. In other words, it's justifying exactly what happened and why they had all these issues. Well, and yeah, isn't it funny that it's a symbol of that as well? And so that's just something to keep in mind with all of it. So suddenly with this Anaconda Plan, you have a plan to utterly destroy every aspect of the nation, destroy the cities, cut off all supplies, and control everything. And now we go to the next aspect. Total destruction in the land, loss of life, and even a change in government. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? We have no shortage of photos that show that cities were destroyed. Now, this is South Carolina. Look at the nice brick there. And then you also have these blocks again that we thought were only with star forts, but apparently not. Nice advanced lights, too, in South Carolina in the 1860s. And then, of course, we have these little urns. Remember when we were looking at these with the different sketchbooks that we saw? Some of the blocks that this were built out of. And this is Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. So even cities in the north were gutted like this. It's very strange and very interesting. And what you see with this is it's easy to consider the fact that there were many things that were destroyed and there was a large loss of life. Oh, yeah, without a doubt. Now, there were some other aspects with the Civil War. And here's something I ask you all to do. Look up Iowa in the Civil War, and here's why. Iowa had a number of regiments that fought in the Civil War. And what I'd ask you to do is, if you have the time and the inclination, try to find out what the unit history of those regiments are. Try to see if you can really look into it and really document them. Well, that's just it. Isn't that funny, Dukes? That's a good point. Yeah. Couldn't manufacture enough rifles, but there you go. But they had plenty of supplies and they didn't need to live off the land. And so try documenting, and it's not just Iowa, take any state and try finding the unit history of all the regiments. Things get problematic once you get past their most famous regiments. Now, you could say it's just because they didn't keep good records, blah, 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 every excuse that you have. But it's really hard to actually document who was involved with it and what they were really doing. Now, this is Samuel Curtis. We actually visited his home in the Keokuk exploration. He was supposedly affiliated with Iowa. Always interesting hairstyles that we have from the Civil War. The other interesting thing with the Civil War is there's a little bit more to it when we consider what happened with this interesting train chase, the Great Locomotive Chase. And I think this is the origin of, what do we got here? Oh, yeah, from Missouri, Quantrill's Raiders, yep. And maybe those were real guerrilla fighters, or maybe that was just a legend that was made up so they could justify more stringent measures, as they usually tend to be. Now, I think that this Great Locomotive Chase is the origin of America or the United States affiliation with car chases. So they say that a Union force raided Atlanta, stole a locomotive, and then went on a chase to Chattanooga. And unfortunately, they were followed by the Confederates, and eventually they were captured. Now, this is quite an interesting account because they try to say that this train chase happened. So, yeah, the origin of all car chases in the United States. These are the individuals who were involved. We only have 5 pictures, and then we have a lot of sketches. So, yeah, sketch here, sketch there, sketch here. So I don't see any problem with this account. Oh, by the way, did you know that this was also made into a Disney movie a while back? Not recently, quite a while back. And then this is supposedly the reunion. So the name of the locomotive they snagged was the General. So I guess not all of them died, but, that's always the change in story. Oh, yeah. Well, and Hollywood things is exactly what you tend to have with that as well. Absolutely. Well, maybe. The thing about it is we don't really even know if there's separate sides now, do we? It's really strange how the Civil War started and then how it ended. We're told that it was 2 sides, but then they just all made well. There was no guerrilla warfare. Quantrill's Raiders just hung it up. Now we're told certain people like Jesse James and individuals like that continued fighting. Although you see them on Little House on the Prairie, and Jesse James and his brother were heroes, I guess, before they raided Northfield. So the fighting was real. The fighting was no doubt real, but what it was about and what the goals of it were, no doubt about it, it was something else completely. Ah, great one right there. Yes, the Lincoln-Kennedy synchronization paradox. Now, it makes no sense if what we're told about history is real. It makes perfect sense if everything is just made up now, doesn't it? Absolutely, that's a great point. Now, what exactly is going on with all this? You can take all this evidence, you can look at photos of the Civil War, they may be real, they may not be. Well, that's just what we don't know. We don't know what actual histories were assigned and when. We can assume, and it's an assumption, that what was assigned to the United States was a lot more recent for whatever reason. And I think where the answer to that is found is look into who provides the military muscle for the land. I'll give you a hint. It's not out of Europe. Oh, yeah. And a lot of it probably is. But that's why we have all these interesting accounts that they're supposed to be interesting. We're supposed to talk about them. We're supposed to get emotionally invested in this. We're supposed to feel this. There's a reason why we have Grand Army of the Republic, why they pose for photographs like this. This is James J. Andrews, the guy who supposedly masterminded the Great Locomotive Chase, and we don't even have a picture of him. But oddly enough, when you look at his face, you might recognize those lines. Let me know if you do. Well, it can be. It most definitely can be a paradox. There's no doubt about that. Well, and that's what we don't know. And for those of you who want to see my theories on the matter, check out the Reset War playlist or the Reset War video or the last reset. And you can actually see a lot of the theories that I have on what was going on, because you might be surprised to know that the United States Civil War was not the only conflict going on in the 1860s. There were conflicts all over the land, on every major continent. And again, we don't know if the timeline is what we're told that it is. And the Civil War just gives you a lot of problems, a lot of contradictions, and it leaves you with a lot of questions. That's why it's bizarre, and that's why we're here talking about it right now. Exactly. Good to see ya. Thanks for joining us. Oh, yeah. The Barbary Wars. I mean, and it's hard to say exactly what happened and how this all came into being and, what's the real timeline. We just don't know. We really don't know. And so we have some things that may be from our current era. I have the 5 eras theory. But how do we know we don't have other events? Like, let's just say what we think of as medieval times. Maybe that came from the 4th era, or maybe that came from the reset of the 3rd era to the 4th era. So we just don't know. I mean, there's many different conflicting accounts. There's many different timelines, and we just don't know. So let me go back to one of the telling images. So just bear with me for a second here. I won't go too fast. I don't want to make anybody sick. Here we go. So just a soldier's home. And this goes back to a lot of the research that I've been doing. Oh, yeah. Same name too, huh? That's where the United States military actually supposedly got its reputation too. The United States Marines, Stephen Decatur. Oh, yeah. Well, the whole point behind the 5 era hypothesis is it's just to give some structure to this, because we really don't know. But yeah, well, I mean, what do you think of a structure like this? Do you really think they built something like this right after 1865 as a place to house veterans? I mean, look how we treat our veterans now. Look how we've always treated our veterans. I hate to say that, but do you really think they're going to this kind of effort because they suddenly cared? Now, we're told they did. We're told that they put all this effort into taking care of the veterans after the Civil War. But what makes more sense, that they just rapidly built this building, or that they had this building and repurposed it? That's exactly right, OG Scotty Skid Row interviews. You are correct. And that's what we see as a start of the asylum movement. Well, I greatly appreciate that. Now let's go back to the other one. Now, this is an early exploration from the channel. This is still standing to this day. It's right next to where the Brewers play baseball in Wisconsin, the old Wisconsin Union Soldiers Home. This was designed by old channel nemesis E. Townsend Mix. Yes, they attribute him to this building as well. You can still go walk this building to this day, and you can see that this is a gigantic compound. And the construction on it's quite, well, I'll just say phenomenal. And it's an early exploration on the channel, so if you want to go watch it, be my guest. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right. Wild alchemical spirit, you're absolutely right. There's all kinds of little resets going on all the time. Yep, You guys are familiar with the name, E. Townsend Mix. He shows up pretty much anywhere in the Midwest United States. If there is an amazing building, he tends to be behind it. And let's not forget his mentor, Sidney Mason Stone. Yeah, they actually try to sell us these names. E. Townsend Mix, Sidney Mason Stone. Yeah, who knows on the other names. But also think about that when you think of all these great Civil War generals and what they may have done or what they didn't do. So, oh yeah. Yeah, that's a good point right there. Oh yeah. Well, and crypto, it's just like that, the paradigm that I have: conflict, assimilation, indoctrination. That same pattern has never left us, and we still have it to this day. What's one of the other ones? So, again, when you look at this kind of construction here in Fort Warren, I mean, is this anything that we could do today? Could anybody even attempt this? Does anybody bother? Nope. But look, it's okay. You got a plaque. And that 1850, oh gosh, that's horrible. But then you can see in this photo from the Civil War, it looked exactly the same. And so that's why I would encourage you, if you're looking for good explorations wherever you are, at least if you're in the United States, although you can find other conflicts that were going on at the same time in your respective nation, for those of you who aren't from the United States, where you can find these structures associated with them. Now, we'll be told they're used as fortresses, but just imagine if they were actually used as internment compounds. Because what we speculate is that the reset conflict was going on. They were targeting all of these enclaves, and these were the locations where they held all the people that they captured. People either agreed to go along with things, they assimilated, or they were killed. Oh, yeah. And I mean, they're all over the place. Wherever you are in the land, you'll find examples of this. And some of these still stand to this day, like the Wisconsin Soldiers Home near Milwaukee, right next to where the Brewers play. Oh, by the way, that is still a Veterans Affairs compound that building's a part of. So it's very, very interesting where it actually applies and what it's all about. But when you think about this and you think about how the aspect and the paramount importance of internment camps, concentration camps, prisoner of war camps, and how they never went away, that seemed to be a lasting legacy from the conflict. So in a way, you could say it was actually about imposing slavery. And let's talk about how it changed the government. The United States government imposed federal income taxes for the first time during the Civil War. No, it was not 1913 when they first did it. It was actually in the United States Civil War. Furthermore, it also supposedly and officially led to the increased power and centralization of the United States government. It was also the first time they practiced mass military conscription. Oh, yeah. So a lot of interesting things that persist to this day that all came from the Civil War. And then last but not least, it was when they said that they had the first full industrialization of the United States. And then they exercised it again during World War I, according to the official history. Exactly, Robert. Did the states ever actually have rights? I don't know. It's weird. They kind of play it both ways. In 2020, suddenly it seemed like the governors in the states had all kinds of rights, and you had local counties that could suddenly violate the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights. Remember in 2020? Oh, yeah. And I'll, just highlight, it was also in Wisconsin too, but, it could have been anywhere. Well, and who knows? I mean, maybe it was likely well before that quantum paradox. I mean, it's interesting how the most efficient things that governments do always involve collecting taxes. That's where all the best records are kept, and that's something that you can never try fooling around with. I mean, you can get away with anything else, but oh gosh, if you try to go off on taxes, they've got a literal army of people that are going to come down on you. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's a widely known fact. That's exactly what happens. And supposedly this is where it all started. Yeah, I'd like to see that castle myself. Ding, ding, ding. Exactly, Celeste. And it's designed to control perceptions and thoughts and to make sure that our minds are not open so we can actually formulate or get an idea of what's really going on. And it's always funny seeing everyone try to defend exactly what we're told happened. I mean, when you see Andersonville here, what's really strange to me is I've been to this part of Georgia extensively. This does not look like any terrain I've ever seen in Georgia at any time of the year. Now, if anybody wants to correct me on that, be my guest. I mean, I'm open to it. But what exactly is going on with this? At the prisoner of war camps, and why are these conditions so squalid? Why are we told that so many died here? Well, and effectively, that's what happened. I mean, even the official history says that, Andrew. That's exactly what happened. Exactly, Rebecca. I mean, can you imagine seeing anywhere in Florida or Georgia that looks like this today? It's just really strange, and it doesn't make any sense to me. And yet they want to tell us that Andersonville was a place where thousands of Union soldiers died. They didn't have the resources to take care of them. They somehow had the resources to keep armies in the field, though, but they didn't have the resources to take care of prisoners in the prisoner of war camps. Now, you might be saying, well, that was just the South. They were under a blockade. It makes sense. But there's accounts of the same thing happening in the northern prisoner of war camps, where they supposedly had all the resources that they needed. It's really, really strange. And it seems to be what they're pushing on to us about what really happened. Yes, these were internment camps, and this is where you get sent. And sorry, but you're pretty much done once you get sent to one of these places. You either capitulate and comply, or you're gone. And if you think about it, it's the same model that we've seen. Well, and that's just it. And yet, how many people would allow this just because they follow orders and never question anything? Yeah, maybe. Sooner West, maybe. I'm starting to wonder about that, Sky Sage, especially since we're told that the United States economy is doing so incredibly well, even though it was shut down for a year. I don't know. Maybe they need to shut it down more if it seems to jumpstart it so well, right? What else did I want to go over? So Francis Drake, Marion Drake, you might remember Drake University is named after him in Des Moines, Iowa. They still have that nice old main building there that we explored. Odd photo of Lincoln and McClellan. Very strange. And isn't it interesting? What do you see is wrong with this? Does this stand out to anybody? For anybody who knows anything about proper care of the United States flag? Yeah, I don't think any of us would allow ourselves to go there, Robert. I think that's how we feel. Yeah, pretty much. Now, did they try it or did they just say it? That's the other thing about it. But yeah, they will. They do. Too many stars on the flag, but also the fact that they're using the flag as a frickin' tablecloth. Because the United States flag is supposed to be a symbol of the United States. You don't use it as a tablecloth, and you sure as heck don't do it when the president's there. Now, maybe we could say, well, the American Legion hadn't come around. They hadn't developed proper flag etiquette, so they were just going to treat it however they wanted to. Oh, thanks, CJ Trickster. I appreciate that. But it's just really weird because you just see a flag, and basically it's borderline desecrated, so... Yeah, you're probably onto something there, Isaac. That probably makes more sense than what we've got from the official history, right? Yeah. Remember what Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage and all the people merely players. Yeah, that was even in the 1980s DuckTales, too. Yeah, it's the same feeling we get, Wendy. Remember that World War II picture we looked at with, oh no, wait, I didn't show that to everybody. I'll have to show that at some point. Picture with Patton and Eisenhower, and they're all dressed up and their shoes are shined and they're just walking through mud. Yeah, that's a good one. See if there's any others we want to review. Oh, Robert E. Lee. I mean, it's funny how they associate him with everything that's South, and yet you have all these images of him standing in front of these very well-constructed buildings. I even like this chair right here. This looks like a very comfortable chair. Nice felt. I mean, what's he standing in front of here? What's exactly going on? You look a little closely at these images and they're really strange. Like even the pictures of the famous generals. None of it really makes a lot of sense, and it just creates more questions than you get answers. Looking up the story, though, behind Arthur MacArthur and the Union charge up Missionary Ridge, that's just bizarre because that's where they try to sell us that basically, it's a non-doctrinal term. A bonsai charge by the Union actually worked. And even though the Confederates held the high ground on Missionary Ridge, they couldn't repulse the attack. It's really, really strange. I mean, that never happened in the United States Civil War. Oh, yeah. Well, and then there's also what actually applies, too. You know, I mean, do the rights apply, or is it an interpretation of the law? It's really strange. And they always seem to go back and forth to it. Was he? I don't know. You know, and I don't know what to make of the Confederate States of America. I mean, did they really exist as we're told, or were they just another faction, if you will, of the reset forces? When you look closely at it and you see that the United States military wore blue and gray, and a lot of the rest of the world did, it creates a conflicting account. It's hard to say. And I don't think we're supposed to know. Oh, yeah. Chickamauga, Chattanooga, a lot of those battlefields are interesting places just on their own, RB. You were absolutely right. So that's quite an interesting aspect to it as well. But then this whole account of Braxton Bragg, the incompetent commanders, Ambrose Burnside being left in command after a failed charge, Lincoln not accepting his resignation. I mean, it's just, it goes on and on when you have the incompetent leadership. Why is it we always have this selective leadership incompetence? Why do we have all these different aspects on the competence spectrum? One day, the Confederate Army is very competent. It can defeat much larger Union forces. And then, for no reason whatsoever, Robert E. Lee tries a frontal assault, which gets his forces slaughtered. And then it's just a question of time until the war ends. It reads like a bad movie. It really does. Well, it's probably a cover for something else. So, oh, yeah, that's a good point there, Sky Sage. You're right. Yep, Robert E. Lee's property was seized, and it is now Arlington Cemetery. His house is still there, and it's intact. I featured it in an early exploration. So, oh, yeah. Oh, it is, Celeste. It is actually what was his home, and we're told that the home on it was built in the early 1800s. I remember featuring it in early exploration, so. Yeah, I know. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that, but I got to say, though, in Gettysburg, I did appreciate Richard Jordan's portrayal of General Armistead, but, you know, I'm always a fan of Richard Jordan. He passed away way too young. I think he was one of the legitimate actors. You might remember him from Logan's Run. When we reviewed that movie. He played Francis Seven quite well, in fact, even though he was the bad guy. Oh, yeah. Corinth is very interesting chassis. Yeah, it's something else I'm going to have to look into in a little bit more detail. What do you think of this photo? I just had to come back to this one. This Union cannon crew from the Battle of Gettysburg. Oh, yeah. Okay. Let me guess, Sooner, you're over 6 feet tall? If I remember those qualifications. Or did they waive that when you were in? I remember there was a certain height requirement if you're going to be in the Old Guard, the 3rd Infantry Regiment. Well, they say that he did, but it's a little bit more of a legend. There's a lot of things that became legend that weren't necessarily fact. So, yeah, I'd say it does, in a manner of speaking. Yeah, I agree with that, Sky Sage. And that's the question you should ask whenever you see any Civil War photo. What's the authenticity behind it? Because a lot of them, at best, are very questionable. You know, whichever battle you're looking at. Oh, yeah, here's one of my favorite ones, the massive technology of the Intrepid. Isn't this a great balloon? I think I can I see through the balloon here? Did they forget the top part of the balloon and they had to sketch it in, or are we just supposed to believe it's an eroded photograph? It's a deteriorated photograph. You know, we only had the best photography until we didn't. Oh, yeah, that's a good question there, Celeste. We just don't know. Yeah, super advanced tech, there's no doubt about it. Fort Riley's a strange place too, Waffle Gear. Yeah, the 1st Infantry Division. They're starting to, RB. You got to keep going, though. Yeah, maybe, Kit, maybe. Yeah, it's probably painted Photoshop without a doubt behind it. I still find these hydrogen machines so very, very interesting. And what do you think of the USS Alligator? Do you think this really existed? Was this the motivation for Jules Verne's Captain Nemo? The Nautilus was actually the Alligator. Hey, Adam Baum, good to see you. Oh, yeah. Ancient satellite technology. That's right. No doubt about it, Katie. No doubt about it. Oh, yeah. I definitely have. I'll have to follow that up with an exploration. But anyway, in summary, a lot of indications that the Civil War is not what we're told it was, that there was something else going on, that it was a technological industrial revolution, but then we had another technological industrial revolution after it. We had cities that suddenly grew up really quickly, such as Atlanta, even though Atlanta wasn't around that long prior to the Civil War, but it was a major city because it was a rail hub, blah, 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 blah. And so it's just a lot of conflicting accounts, and it's really, really strange. But in any event, give me 1 minute. Let me leave you on a good image. I'll be right back, and I'll take any questions that you have, and sky's the limit on that. I know I'm flipping fast. Just bear with me. Here we go. Here's a good one. So I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So what do you think? These interesting structures. Hey, thanks for that, Sooner West. I really appreciate it. And it's a blast talking about the Civil War. And so maybe the one question I'll look to field is, would you like to see more explorations like this? Can you hear me? Oh, don't tell me they messed up again. Hey, can anybody hear me? Okay, just making sure. Strange things happening. Okay, so more explorations into this questionable historical time frame. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that the live stream went as well as it did. Usually I have all kinds of unique technical difficulties that we'll leave at that. So, all right. Well, it seems like it's a popular topic, and we certainly don't have to be limited to the United States Civil War. There's a lot of other questionable history that we can look into. So, but by all means, you can hit me up on any kind of message and let me know. All right. Well, it looks like I'm getting quite a lot of consensus that we should keep looking into these. So I was going to look to shift to cryptids, but do you want to go to cryptids, or would you like to stay with this strange history? It's a good question there, Earl. I wish I knew the answer to it. Okay. Follow up. So another one on the Civil War, maybe? Or would you like to go look at some of those questionable years? I mean, even 1947 is a very questionable year, so... Well, there's all kinds of things that we can look into. Late 1800s, Cynthia, or are you talking about the Tunguska event? All right, well, it sounds like we've got no shortage of what we should talk about next. Yeah, because I prefer to switch things up a little bit, talk about one topic, and then go to a different topic. Oh, yeah. So maybe next week we'll see how cryptids goes, and then we'll go back to examining history again. So, yeah, Tunguska. More on Civil War. Yeah, that's a good question there, Tony. That's a really good question. That's something I need to dig into a little bit more. Oh, yes, I see what you're a fan of there, Crypto. I guess I'm not too surprised. Okay, yeah, maybe talking about the time paradox. That's a good one, Joseph. I'll have to keep that in mind. Oh, yeah, Adam. Yeah, it's hard to know, what happened around 1850 to 1830, what's real and what's not, so. Ah, okay. Well, heck, we see examples of that every day. Just look who read the news and what they say and what they think. Ah, I only talked about them in one video, Rebecca. Yeah, that's probably a good thing to start to explore into next week. You're right. Oh yeah, we got all kinds of things that we can look at. Extraterrestrials or ultra-terrestrials? Oh yeah, T-Fetch. Yeah, I don't know if you were here when we did that live stream. We tried to breach that one. My goodness, did I get a lot of pushback on that. It's a psyop! It's a psyop! Yeah, whenever someone screams something's a psyop. Yeah, I did that too, Leonard, in December. Same thing. Can't imagine why. I guess there's just some people out there that don't appreciate the topic, if you know what I mean. Alchemy! Now, I got that one on the on-deck circle there, Adam. That's a good one, too. All right, so I will post all of these great structural photos that we looked at and then a couple of the other questionable ones up on the old channel Reddit, so. Hey, Rebecca, have you ever heard the song Not Your Kind of People by Garbage? It's a great song. I think it applies to a lot of us. We're not extraterrestrials. We're just not their kind of people. Yeah, exactly, Maxwell. That's kind of the go-to. It's a psyop, so don't talk about it. It's all good, Leonard. I mean, we can always go back to it and give it another whirl. If you look on the channel's alternate locations, I think you can still find that live stream on the shape of the land, as we said. Oh yeah, Gulliver's Travels is a good one, Jamie. Dog-faced pony soldier. Funny how they still talk about that a lot too, Heidi. You hear that a lot. Okay, so we got historical examinations, we got cryptids, we got alchemy, a lot of good topics up, so. Yeah. Well, you remember, Chassis, I'm not so concerned about numbers. I'm just more concerned about quality, conversation, and great ideas. And I've got to say, you've got some wonderful ideas, all of you. So I think we'll have to get into it, Tara. We'll have to talk about that. There's a story, there's a legend, there's an official account behind it. So a lot of interesting things. Well, thanks, Kathy. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's exactly right, Noah. And maybe that's why they don't want us to think in different ways. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. Crazy things can happen. Hey, Rabbit, good to see you. Yeah, probably. Going back in one of the earlier eras there, so. Well, I think we'll give cryptids a try. I've been wanting to breach that topic for a while. Coming very soon, Quantum Paradox, coming soon. But remember, that's another quote-unquote sensitive topic, so I got to be careful about how I approach it. Yeah, exactly, Sky Sage. They look exactly alike, don't they? Definitely gives you that impression, doesn't it? All right, Crypto, well, I'm here, so be my guest. Probably half and half, Jamie. I'd say it's half and half. There's always some truth to everything, so that way they can back it up with a little truth. Good question on that one. Well, I didn't see the Wolfman when I was exploring St. Coletta, but they say there's one around there, that little school I looked at in Wisconsin, the channel's first exploration, so. Yeah, exactly, Sky Sage. I'm supposed to stay in my box. I have a problem doing that. I don't know if you've noticed. I've got a real serious problem doing that, so. Okay, so we want another poll. All right, I will fire up another poll tomorrow morning, and on the channel public page, I'll also publish the link for posting these images on the Reddit, so. Oh, we got more requests for Zeppelins. Hey, I can always talk about airships. Those are always interesting, so. Terraforming and... Oh, whoa, we could definitely do that too, Celeste. So that's probably actually looking into the earlier eras. I actually suspect that the Dark Ages were the reset period between the third and the fourth era, and then they just rolled it over to our current era to confuse us. So it is real, it happened, but when it happened is up for debate, but who knows for sure. So, all right. Well, I really appreciate everybody being here, and this was a great exploration, and I'm glad this was received so well because I really enjoy these things, and so we will definitely continue. So put up the poll tomorrow. Don't mind my peas. And we will continue on. But as always, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching the channel. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the channel, and it's just been a blast of a journey. And thank you for that, Rebecca. I really appreciate that. And I just want to say all of you are amazing with the great ideas that you bring and the fact that we can all collaborate here. And pretty much everybody I've always seen on these chats, and no, you don't have to agree with me. I like it when you don't, because I think we really get somewhere. We look at different ideas when we can. And in fact, my evolution, my modification of the 5 eras theory has come from all the input that you provided in all these live streams. So I greatly appreciate it. All right. Well, y'all have a great evening. Yes, I said y'all very intentionally. Hey, Julia, good to see you. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next exploration. So I will put out a poll tomorrow, and I will post the images to Reddit. You all have a great weekend wherever you are in the land. I'll give you the classic explanation here, Benza. Russell Nash from Highlander. I'm from lots of different places, and I really am. Y'all have a good night. Take care of yourselves.